everyone. Thank you so much for coming. I'm Nancy. I'm the director from the Highline Heritage Museum. And before we start the program, I would like to do this. Let's take a moment to recognize that we are on native land. Please think of in honor of those who have preceded us, including the people of the Guamish, Snoqualmie, Nisqually, and the Mungashi tribes. I'd like to start the programs, not just this one, but everything that we do in the museum, because we believe this is important. It's not just checking the box, just doing it for one time and that's it. It's something that we embrace every single day, and this is something that we'd like to cultivate for everyone. So once again, welcome everyone, and I'm gonna let the ladies to introduce the program. So thank you.
Hi everybody, thanks for coming to 7 Stories. This is an evening when 7 people tell stories for 7 minutes, ideally, and it doesn't always work out that way. And true stories about our lives, usually on a theme. The theme tonight is mother or gifts, or for tonight, whatever. We're going with whatever you got. So beginning our program is our own fabulous Crystal Hairston, who is our MC. And we had somebody drop out at the last minute, and Crystal graciously popped up and said, hey, I'm going to tell a story. Crystal is the Director of Worship Arts at Lake Burien Presbyterian and has called the Seattle area home for 10 years. She loves all things creative, including painting and working with her hands, and finds the sweetest joys in just spending time with her husband, their teenage and adult children, and their puppy, Theo. So please welcome Crystal Hairston.
Thank you so much, Deborah, and welcome again to everyone online and in person to the Highline Heritage Museum and 7 Stories, which is one of my favorite places to be on a Friday night because I always walk out feeling like I know people. I just ran into a storyteller at the farmer's market, and we were like close friends. Hey, how you doing? I know you from 7 Stories. It really is an opportunity to build community. So thank you for the chance to be here and share my story with you all. And today I want to share a story about my mom. My mom, ever the educator, always seemed to know more about our future than we did, and had us constantly taking lessons from her. The neighborhood kids gave us a very hard time and always called us the Brady Bunch because we always had a house full of kids and because my mom's high standards around family tradition. Every night, we were expected to make it around the table for dinner and share about our day. And to provide a little context for you, we lived in a very urban neighborhood. I call it the hood, in Crip gang territory, with 2 crack houses on our block and a string of homicides that seemed to constantly ramp up in the summer times. And yet my mom would always say, where we live doesn't define us. We decide who we'll be and how we'll show up in this world. Nonetheless, when she would call our youth pastor to tell him we needed to come home early from hanging out with our youth group for etiquette classes, it felt like a punishment, not preparation. Yes, the youth van would pull around to the big blue house on our street, and as we were getting out, all the kids would mock us for having to take our classes. Each week was a different lesson that she would continue to reiterate throughout the years so we wouldn't lose our training. One week it was learning to answer the phone like administrative assistants. Hunter household, yes, one moment please. Or, Hunter household, I'm sorry, she or he is unavailable at the moment. May I please take a message? And yes, we were expected to answer the phone like that. The next week, it was walking back and forth, shoulders back, with a book on our heads, and how to shake hands and give eye contact. The following week, it was table etiquette, how to set the table for a formal dining experience. And the next week, it was how to eat at that table, posture, utensils or order, napkins, forearm placement, no elbows, and how to burp discreetly. Which I learned later, people still hear. And every week, like clockwork, we'd be the laughing stock of the night as our friends learned what Miss Max came up with that week. And we complained about how unnecessary all of this was. And she would always reply, One day, you'll be in the presence of kings and queens, and you'll need to know how to behave. Well, one summer we got a needed break from my mom's lessons for a road trip to California with our youth group to go to Disneyland. We were so excited. We had been doing fundraisers for a while. Now it was finally time to have fun. Our leaders let us know that we also had a special dinner at Disneyland as a treat from a club member. Don't know what that means. After a long, hot day of standing in lines and screaming on rides and giggling with goofy ears and taking pictures with characters, we met up for dinner and were led to a super weird location. If you've ever heard rumors about Disney's private back doors, alleyways, secret clubs, tunnel system, that's all real, believe me. And about 15 sweaty kids from my neighborhood and church were led to a dark alleyway, to a dingy door that seemed to blend in with the wall, and cautiously we followed our leaders up an unassuming staircase that opened up into the most grand private dining room I had ever seen in my life. We were blown away and out of our league for sure. Everything on the tables was gold, and the bathrooms had literal thrones for toilets. But there was one sweet moment that culminated that night, and in an instant, it all made sense. As we sat down to this decadent table and our waiters approached, each of my friends around the table who spent years teasing and mocking me leaned in and quickly whispered, "Crystal, tell us what to do." And a 1500 dinner later, indeed my mom was right. She knew all along that our future was destined for greatness, and she always wanted us to be confident that no matter what prestigious places or spaces we found ourselves in, we belonged and we could hold our own. Thanks. Well, I get the pleasure of introducing our next storyteller. Our next storyteller is Margaret Cummings. Margaret has lived on the West Side Peninsula, primarily West Seattle, for 50 years. Burien has been home for 3 of those. She is a traveler, photographer, lover of nature and the wild. Curiosity has taken Margaret on many adventures in remote areas and among different cultures worldwide. So I cannot wait to hear from Margaret Cummings. Welcome.
Don't let it be a letdown as I start. Also, hello. I go by the name Peggy.
Oh, good to know.
Yes, and I always forget. Margaret is legal, when you sign documents, but Peggy is me. And I apologize, I do have a few notes because this was a short notice. However, I want to share a few things about my life, which started with my mother and father raising me to be prepared for taking chances on life's journey, instilling me with a spirit of curiosity and adventure. That's the mother part. The rest of it is getting what you need. The Rolling Stones were never my favorite, trust me. Little Mick Jagger. However, their song, "You can't always get what you want, but if you try sometimes, you might find what you need." And at the age of 22, in 1968, now you know how ancient I am, I moved into a cottage apartment on Alki Point near the beach. For 2 years, I had been doing shift work, but now I had this. Now I had a daytime job and weekends off. And what am I going to do with my life now? I had left the University of Washington after 2 years. Somehow, 18th century poetry, which was not exactly E.E. Cummings or Theodore Roethke, along with pithing frogs and learning how to pronounce mon petit chou in French, didn't seem relevant. In 1963, I think they thought it was, but that was another era. So I left school, but I really didn't know what I wanted to do. So after unpacking and settling into my first apartment on the beach, I saw an ad for a mountaineering class at the Seattle Community College. Well, I'd never even been on a hike in my life, other than a walk in the park. But I was really interested because one of my favorite books that I had read recently was The West Ridge, written by Tom Hornbein, about the climb that he and Willie Unseld did in 1963 of the West Ridge of Mount Everest, which was a traverse. And on the way down the South Col route, they were trapped by nightfall and spent a bivouac above the death zone and survived. And it was such an amazing story, and he was such a wonderful writer. It wasn't like, oh, we put on our boots and went up the mountain. He had philosophy and all kinds of other wonderful things in that book. And I was just, wow, that is so cool. And no, I never even thought about going to Everest, trust me. So I also recently, just for the first time, visited Mount Rainier. I was totally entranced by the beauty of not just the mountain, but the entire environment. And it became one of those moments in time that just stuck with me forever. It was like the sense of wonder that is still with me today, particularly when I am in the wild and in the mountains. So there were about 10 of us in this mountaineering class, and I was the only female, which was basically how it went with climbing in those days. I was like 5'3" and 110 pounds, and all the men were in their mid-20s and 30s and large and very physically fit. And later on climbs or hikes, if I was chided for not carrying my weight, I would remind them that I didn't have any weight. But I managed to get there no matter. And so the first thing we did in the class was talk about equipment. Well, I didn't have any equipment, but $100 would get you the extra equipment that you needed, including boots, crampons, ice axe, sleeping bag, clothing. You get the whole idea. And I was starting out from total scratch. Fortunately, there was a wonderful Army surplus store on First Avenue, and my mother was a fantastic clothing designer and sewer, and so she modified all those Army surplus clothes to fit me for my mountaineering back in the days when we wore wool pants. So I had my outfit. But so my first ever backpack in my life was snow survival and climbing practice at Cayuse Pass on Mount Rainier. I had a borrowed Trapper Nelson large pack. If you've never heard of one, it's a wooden frame with a big canvas bag hanging on it, and it literally came down below my butt when I was carrying it. And in it, I had what I needed for this practice. You know, the one pot, one small stove, one duck down sleeping bag, and my shelter was 2 Army ponchos snapped together to form a little cubby to sleep in. And I just loved it. I had the greatest time. It was so amazing to be out there, and I had never experienced that. Growing up in Spokane, I knew about snow, but not that much. So that was the beginning of my hiking and climbing adventures. And I made friends with 3 of the guys, one of whom became a lifelong friend. And we actually climbed together for several years, developing our skills and meeting other climbers. And small, strong, and adventurous, they actually treated me like an equal, and they were never condescending. And I really appreciated that, because when you are roped together on a mountain, your life can depend on the person that's with you on the rope. And to have that confidence in my ability was really amazing, uplifting. And it gave me a positive perspective on myself and who I was. And my friend, and you have to excuse my notes here, would encourage me, you need to believe in yourself. Don't accept boundaries that we sometimes set for ourselves that are societal norms or artificial. They come from outside of you. The boundaries that you set from within yourself create or free who you are. And that was the thing that I really learned in that situation. So the mountaineers call it the freedom of the hills. And to paraphrase a different quote, wildness is in the preservation of the soul. And that's where I found my soul. I continued climbing and exploring for the rest of my life. I obviously don't climb anymore. I summited peaks in the Cascades, Mount Rainier in 1971. That same year, I flew to Anchorage, Alaska, and participated in the first river raft trip, commercial one, down the Copper River from its headwaters to Cordova. That's another whole story, but it was such an amazing experience. And I did that. I just signed up for it and flew up there because I had that confidence that I had developed. I went on to join the mountaineers. I was a trainer in their basic mountaineering class. I taught mountain rescue safety and also mountaineering first aid. I became an emergency medical technician for the Seattle Mountain Rescue, and I also drove the truck when we went out on missions. So I went from someone who had never been on a hike to a very active person. And I found what I need in nature and wilderness and wildness. And it shaped me and made me the person that I became. Oh, and I never asked for permission.
Thank you so much, Peggy. May we all be that adventurous and bold. Appreciate that.
It's inside of us, just let it out.
Come on, she said it's inside of us, just let it out. Our next storyteller is Michael Shilley. Michael Shilley was born in England, but lived here for the past 55 years. This is his second storytelling experience, although he has been writing stories for 20 plus years. He wants to become a good storyteller, and he's asking for your assistance. He has just spent the past 4 months in England refreshing his accent. So you're welcome to raise your arm if he's talking too fast and not in his best American accent. Please welcome Michael Shilley.
Well, I was told to speak out my mother. And thinking of my mother, it goes back to 1904. And I just wondered if anybody here has ever been to Portsmouth in southern England. Yeah, have you seen the battleship? Yeah, okay.
And all the other ships.
Right. So my mother was born across the estuary in Gosport, which is a satellite town to Portsmouth, and most people worked at the shipyards. How about anybody who's been to London and seen the Nelson's column? Okay, it's a really, really high column, and poor little Nelson stuck on top. And because he was a little guy, all those guys in those days were, if they were 5 foot, they were really, really tall. And if you go on a ship and you go down below, you have to put your head right down to get in through there. Anyway, my mother was born in 1904 in Gosport, and she had an older sister by 2 years, Dorothy, and a younger was Ruby. They were pretty kids when they grew up, and they were soon on bikes, and they were right on the Atlantic Ocean, so they were able to go out to their seaside to swim. They had a beach hut out there that they were able to use. But somehow I believe, now I just want to say this because I've never written, all these stories I've never written about my mother. And so this is the first chance I've actually been thinking about my mother for many, many years. And she must have been quite a gal because she was a bit outgoing, I think, more than the other two kids, because she joined a cycling club by the time she was 16. And cycling clubs in those days were big time. I mean, say 1920s and 30s, even up to the 50s, bicycle clubs were big time. And they'd go out on a Sunday, two abreast on these little tiny roads, and go out to tea somewhere, maybe 50 or 60 miles away. And the time they got home, they could have put in 100, 120 miles.
Wow.
Yeah. And I got to tell you about the roads in England, though, because in those days, the landowners would not allow the road builders to go through their land. And so they had to go around the land. And there was high hedgerows, And so these cycling clubs would have to keep taking right and left-hand turns, very, very dangerous. And the roads were only wide enough for a cart and horse, and so I'm sure they got into a lot of problems. I wasn't there, but I'm sure they did. On one of these trips, no, it's not quite right. There was every month, I think it was, there were 2 or 3 people from each club would join the Wessex Club. The Wessex is an old word for the whole south of England. It covered several counties. There was Sussex, Hampshire, Wiltshire, and Dorset. That was Wessex. So the cycling club was called the Wessex Club. And so many people from each club joined once a month to the Wessex Club. And it must have been there that she was sent and met a guy by the name of Albert. And I don't know if it was love at first sight or what it was, but I guess they hooked up, and they lived 30 miles apart. So for a date, they'd have to cycle 30 miles and spend the day together, I guess. So I don't know if that's, I'm sure they've done that, because their love grew and they married. And when they did marry, it was in Gosport in a church. And I do have a photograph of them coming out of the church. And their cycling pals have bicycle wheels held up like this. There's a tunnel of love coming out of the... And on their 3-tier cake, they have a tandem on top, which is bicycle made for 2, right? Tandem. Yeah. So that was fun to hear, to remember that. And so they went back to Albert's home in Eastleigh, which is a railroad town, and he was a boilermaker, made boilers for engines, steam engines. And in those days, it was steam engines fueled by coal. So on the steam engine, you had a driver plus a fireman, which shoveled coal all day. So they bought a little bungalow out in a village. Bungalow is just 1-story house, small house. And they moved out into this little village called Fair Oak, and that has a history of its own. It goes back to 660 AD, when there was a French settlement there. You know, the French and the Romans were always invading England, so you never knew who was in charge. So, yeah, they moved into this little house, and in no time, the little guy was born in Winchester. And Winchester has its own history too. It's an ancient city. I could tell you a story about Winchester, but I better go carry on. They immediately bought a sidecar so that my mother could go shopping and take the little guy with her on the sidecar. Then at weekends, of course, they took the sidecar off of her bike and put it on the tandem, and off they went for their Sunday trip. So I was an attendee at their Sunday's teas, which I didn't know much about, but I do remember later in life, I might tell you, some of the places they went to, you'd be horrified. There were thatched cottages, or thatched tea rooms, with no ceilings. So there's the thatch right there, you know, the straw thatch. So in 1936, there was a worldwide flu epidemic, just like COVID, I guess. And my mother was a fatal victim. I was 16 months old. My father held a big family meeting, and my mother's side came, and my father's side. My father had 5 brothers and a sister. They all came. My Auntie Ruby and her husband Jimmy, who was a very talented clockmaker and clock repairer, they wanted to adopt me. My Uncle Bill, my father's next youngest brother, whose wife, Rose, could not conceive either, they wanted to adopt me. But he was adamant that he was going to keep his little boy and bring his mother and father to live with him and raise me. So grandmother and granddad came. Granddad was bedridden with arthritis. So grandmother was 60 years old, And now she was going to raise another kid. She'd already raised, in actual fact, she birthed 8 children, and 6 survived, 5 boys and 1 girl. And I have a favourite photograph of her. I mean, this girl was tough. She was in the backyard with an outside hat on, one that you wear downtown, but an apron on, and a spade. And she has a spade, a foot on the spade like this, digging up vegetables. And she used to grow the vegetables and give us great meals, you know. So she was a great old lady, and I'll never forget her. I'll probably run out of time already, right? I didn't see the sign come up.
No, I didn't put it up.
Okay.
Yeah, you got 54
Well,
seconds to 7 minutes.
Yeah, there
But
isn't. There is another story there, actually. My grandmother raising me, because we went through the Second World War together, and there is another 7-minute story right there.
Wow.
So maybe next time.
Okay.
Every time you tell a story, I feel like we need to be in one of those thatch tea rooms so we can have time to. I remember a story being told about love ads, and as you were talking, I thought the ad needed to say, "We'll travel for love," because that's quite a story. So thank you so much for sharing. We appreciate it. Our next storyteller is such a wonderful person because I came to her and said, "I need another storyteller. How much do you love me?" And she gladly, thankfully agreed to tell a story. I always feel like she is an anchor in this community. Born and raised in White Center, Burien area, was Burien Citizen of the Year, is a local pastor and just an all-around wonderful community member that cares for the community, for the youth, and that is committed to be a part of change, a wonderful change agent in the world. So I feel so privileged to call her a leader and friend. So please join me in welcoming storyteller Reverend Lena Thompson.
Good evening. Thank you, Crystal. I'll admit, I've been asked to be a storyteller when the project first started, and I was like, nope. And for some reason, I was really excited tonight because of the topic. To be able to just share a little bit about my mother. And so thank you for asking, and thank you all for letting me share space with you. When I think about my mother, there's a few images that maybe I'll share some of the stories that kind of bring those images to life. One is that my mother was a very strong woman, a quiet person, rooted deeply in her faith and in prayer and work. She was a hard worker. She was very present to our family. There's 5 of us kids, and my parents, when they moved to the White Center community, it was the late 1950s. And so we were one of very few families of color that lived in this community. And so that in itself, to me, oftentimes having conversations with my parents about what that was like to be people of color in a community that was predominantly white back then. And a lot of that they didn't totally share completely with us, I'm sure, because it was hard. But it was something that we grew up just aware of. And so even in that, I think, to think about my mother as a young woman, my parents come from the island of Tutuila, which is in American Samoa, in the village of Alau. And they kind of lived not that far apart from each other in this very small little village. And I was privileged enough to want to go back and actually visit this village where my parents came from. And it was funny because what came to life for me was the stories that my mom would tell about their courtship. And they would have a meeting place between where their 2 houses were. There was kind of this rock that the village that my parents lived in and come from is a village that is right on the ocean shore. It's right there. You wake up in the morning and the ocean is right there. So there was this big rock that they would always say, okay, let's meet there. And so they would meet there and, tried to keep their love and their courtship a secret. But my grandmother found out, and my grandmother on my mom's side, and she was a feisty woman. Her name was Taufua, Grandma Taufua. And she would come after my dad and throw rocks at him and tell my mother to tell him to go back to his family, which in our custom, this is what, go back to your family and, leave my daughter alone. And so it was really fun to go back and to see, some of these places. Other stories that my mother would tell of growing up, she had 7 sisters, and nobody had money back then, not in the same way that we understand how things work here. And so she learned, along with her sister, how to weave baskets and weave mats, and that was their income basically for their family. They would weave mats and baskets and then take them to the market to sell. And again, going back and be able to actually see these places where my mom and her sisters would do this work and where they would go to sell their wares was quite something. I was in high school when I was able to go back and actually see where my parents grew up. As I said, she was a beautiful, strong, quiet, and extremely painfully introverted woman, which my father was not. And so they were an interesting pair, especially when it came to things like church. Our family grew up, we went to church every Sunday, no options. We didn't have a choice. Everybody's going to church, so we're getting ready, and my mother was the one that was waking everybody up every Sunday morning, getting us all ready to get to church. And then we'd get there, and she would quietly go about her service to God and to the church. She always made sure that the falisa, which is the church, had flowers. So keole falisa means to take care of the church, to make sure that the church was, clean and it had flowers. And so this was my mom's work. And she did it so quietly. She also, for many, many years, was the person that every communion Sunday, that was her gig. That was her. She loved to prepare sacraments. And so we grew up watching her do this every Sunday, just, again, like I said, quietly giving her service. What would be so funny about this is that my father, who is just this extremely wonderful, funny, relational, extroverted guy, when we'd go to church, as soon as church was over, my mom was like rounding all of us up and getting us into the car. And my father was the last person to leave every Sunday. And so we would be sitting in the car waiting for my dad, and then my mom would start honking the horn to hurry him up. And, it was just really funny. And she'd tell us to go get your dad. We're ready to go home. And I'm like, what happened to this nice lady that we just saw earlier today? I learned from my brother. So when my parents moved here in the late 50s and got their home, by the way, our home right now that we still live in was $15,000 in White Center. And so when my parents moved into this house, my father had come and was here for about a year or two before he sent for my mother. And then sent for my mother, and then as they had more money, they started to send for the kids. And so my parents were here for about 3 or 4 years before they sent for one of my brothers, who's 5 years older than me. And we were talking, and I did not know this, because my mother was very quiet about a lot of things. But he was sharing with me one day, he goes, yeah, because he had come to church. I pastor right down the street here at Lake Burien Press. And he said, yeah, Lake Burien, I'll never forget going with Mom when she was cleaning houses on Lake Burien. And I'm like, she what? And he said, oh yeah, Mom used to clean houses for people on Lake Burien. And I had my mother we never talked about that. And my brother recalls going with her. He was 4 or 5, and he would just kind of play while my mother was cleaning. And I just thought, wow, that's so interesting that Mom chose not to share that with us and all the stories that she told. After she had been here a couple of years, probably finished there, she worked at the Olympic Hotel in the laundry. A lot of women who were coming to the States. My aunt also worked there in the laundry at the Olympic Hotel. My aunt actually retired from there. But my mother worked there for many years, and then she ended up following my father and working for Boeing. She was a shop clerk, which is so funny because imagining, maybe some of us have had this experience, you forget that your parents are actually people outside of your home. And so, to think about my mother working a job every day, she worked the day shift. She got up at 5 a.m. She left the house at 5:30. She carpooled. People carpooled. The Boeing folks carpooled back then. And so I remember thinking, being like, why are you getting into this car with people that you don't know? But they would carpool together, and she would work the day shift. She did that for 25 years, and got home at 3 in the afternoon. My father, all those years, worked graveyard. And so he got up at 10 at night, went to work at 11, got home at 7. My dad was the parent that was home during the day for all the school stuff. My mother was at work. And so I often think for my mom to be a woman, home alone with all these kids at night, the strength in that to me just speaks a lot to who she was and who I remember her to be. Even the fact that she would have a job that made her get up at 4:30 in the morning, I can't even imagine. Which brings me to this idea of this sense of vision that both my parents had to actually create a better way. And this was very clear, both from her mostly as how she lived her life. My father was the one that was constantly drilling this into us. I think of her hard work, and I think the privilege that some of us have to be able to choose something that we're passionate about in life. So my passion is community. I get to do that. I don't think my mom was passionate about Boeing. And yet it's something that she did every day to care for all of us and our family. I don't take that lightly. I remember it all the time. In fact, when my mother then retired from Boeing, it was strange for me then, as I was an adult then, to actually see my mother not going to work and to watch her navigate this life of retirement. She walked our dog. And this was one of the funniest memories I have of her retirement. She, one day I got up and there was a sack lunch for me on the table. Mind you, I'm 30 at this time. A sack lunch with my name on it. And I said, Mom, you made my lunch? And she goes, yeah. I said, you didn't have to do that. She said, I missed that all the years that you were growing up. So I made your sack lunch. Take it to work. And so I took it to work and I put it in our fridge at the office. And everybody's like, Lena, really? And I said, just in case you didn't know whose lunch that was, now you do. So many wonderful memories of my mom, and I'm so grateful tonight. As I said, when Crystal told me what the topic was, I was like, absolutely, no question. So thank you so much for letting me be here.
Thank you so much for sharing about your mama. What a gift. If you didn't know, this microphone is sensitive and angry and has an attitude, so stay clear of the microphone. Our next storyteller is Barbara Hammond. Barbara and her husband Ron are storytellers who will also lead our summer 7 Stories workshop on July 6th. So if you're interested and haven't signed up, I'm sure there's more room. And here is the quote: "We are never more convincing than when we tell our very own stories." So welcome, Barbara.
It's not that hard being a mom. I know the usual method is to give birth to somebody. And I've done that, and it's great, mostly. But there are other ways. Our house in Bellevue was known in some circles as the old Hammond house home place. It was a big house. It had 5 bedrooms and 3 bathrooms on 2 levels. And down in the ground level was an enormous family room. Now, the first owners of the place finished the ground floor level. And I was never quite sure about them. Were they really inept about household construction? Or were they really wise and knew that what you really needed in a family room with a household full of teenagers was quiet? They put 6 inches of fiberglass insulation in the walls and ceiling of the family room. Anything short of heavy artillery was perfectly all right. One of our longtime semi-family residents referred to the house as Hammond's Haven for Hapless Humans. We were sometimes known as Ma and Pa. Now, one group that spent a lot of time in that house as substitute siblings was our son's friends. We didn't formally invite them. I'm sure that our son once asked if it was all right if his friends came and played Dungeons and Dragons in the evening, in Friday evening. And they did. They didn't come to the front door. They came to the basement door into the family room, bearing sleeping bags and gaming equipment, whatever that involved. There was a spare refrigerator in the downstairs pantry that was always full of soft drinks, and there were always snacks around. And Ma and Pa were always home. We didn't go out much. If you have a house full of teenagers, you don't go out much. You can't afford it. The noise level was never a bother because with all that insulation, who could hear it? So they came and held forth in the family room. They didn't sleep much. It was always safest to wait until Kurt went to sleep because Kurt was known to finger paint with toothpaste on the faces of anybody who went to sleep too early. However, apparently the gaming went beautifully. I didn't know anything about it. The only thing I knew was when I came down on Saturday morning to start the laundry, the family room was full of inert bodies in various states of disrepair. And so it was. There was milk in the refrigerator. There was cereal in the pantry shelves. And the inert bodies came to life slowly. And a parent came around to pick up various ones for other weekend activities. Now, I found out one time, years later, that one mother came and her son was not ready to leave, and he was pretty rude. And one of the other participants shoved him down on the floor and said, "You don't talk to your mother like that in this house." I didn't know anything about it. When I found out about it, I was rather pleased and even kind of honored. Anyway, the parents picked them up and we vacuumed up the residue. And the family room was pretty durable. And we felt that that was probably an easy way to deal with having our son home on Friday evenings. We knew where he was. and the other parents apparently felt the same. Years later, our son is a trauma and critical care nurse. One of the participants is a lawyer. One is a social worker with a Native American tribe. One is a sales manager for a gaming company. One is a state parks ranger. One is a tattoo artist that pays for the tattoo artisting pays for his other art activities. His brother once said, you know, all us Middleton boys are kind of off center, but Jason is the king. But we felt really honored and privileged to have those kids around. And we feel even more honored and privileged to realize that they were willing to have their adventures and their dangerous encounters in an imaginary dungeon rather than reality. There are worse ways to be a mom.
What a great storyteller. Thank you, Barbara. That was awesome. And we need one of those, honey. We need one of those rooms. We're working on it. I don't know about the insulation, but. Our next storyteller is Teresa Schaefer. Did I say that right?
Yes.
Okay, great. Teresa Schaefer is a native Seattleite who has lived in Burien since 1995. She enjoys being active in her Episcopal parish, travel, cooking, gardening, and working alongside her husband of 32 years. As a mom of two, she is pleased to share a story inspired by one of tonight's themes, which is mother. Welcome.
Tough acts to follow. This is a story about my mother. It takes place in 1955. My mother, Virginia, is 86. She recently recovered from COVID-19. She loves to scroll on her iPhone through Apple News and the B-Town blog. And she's a little obsessed with Ancestry.com. This story is actually the origin story for my nuclear family. And my mother, growing up in Atlanta, Georgia, was Virginia Starnes. Little Ginger Starnes. Folks often remarked that she resembled Shirley Temple with blonde hair and curls and blue eyes. And my grandmother, of course, cultivated that resemblance. Actually, family lore includes stories of Little Ginger entertaining World War II servicemen by dancing on top of the tables at George's Diner. She was 5. It was the good ship Lollipop. Wasn't exactly a side hustle, but you know, occasionally there were some coins that the grateful GIs threw at her. She grew up always about a block or two from the Catholic school where she attended. And eventually, it was all the same building, the elementary and the high school. Eventually, there was just a fence that separated the apartment building from the school. And my mother likes to say that if my grandmother could have found an apartment building within a schoolyard, that's where they would have lived, because that's how important education was to her, and making sure that little Ginger got a good education. And this high school was the place where I guess it would be my step-grandfather, her beloved stepfather, dubbed her the Baker Street debutante, which is kind of funny actually because it's no kind of debutante at all. She was a girl of slender means, but Virginia Starnes was smart. And she went to nursing school on a full scholarship at St. Joseph's Infirmary. And that's where she met my father, Dr. Antonio Luis Herrera Revilla, the scion of a prominent medical family in Tampico, Mexico, who was doing his internship in the U.S. at none other than St. Joseph's Infirmary. And news of this dashing Latin intern spread throughout the nursing school dorm. And they all agreed, yes, he was very handsome, but he had a bad reputation because he was demanding. And he didn't suffer foolish nursing students those who had not practiced their procedures lightly. So yes, good looking, but kind of a pill. So when my mother found out that she was scheduled to do a procedure with Dr. Herrera, perfectionist that she is, she gathered up her instruments. And in her evening visit to my grandmother, she went home every night before nursing dorm curfew and would visit. The two practiced the procedure until it was flawless. Her technique was flawless. She knew what she was doing. The next day, during the procedure, when Dr. Herrera called for scalpel, it was there. Sponge, perfect. Needle, next thing. And this caught his attention. He was not only impressed, but he was also, of course, intrigued with the competent rubia, which is a Spanish slang for blonde. And the next thing you need to know is that St. Joseph's Infirmary was a Roman Catholic hospital run by the Sisters of Mercy. And then the next thing you need to know after that is that they had just enacted a pretty strict no fraternization policy between interns and student nurses. It seems that the year before, an amorous liaison of that sort had led to some rather hasty nuptials. I can't really say whether there was a shotgun involved or not, but the stork was definitely on its way. And so the sisters created this no fraternization policy. And this was something that was okay with the nurses. They, generally complied. But the interns were persistent. After all, Friday night beckoned. And all work and no play. Well, you get the picture. And so, my father was not somebody who usually let a little rule get in the way of a goal he wanted to achieve. And an attractive blonde who was also good at her job, well, that was probably worth the risk. So they're tying off and cleaning up. The procedure has gone well, and he proceeds to make his move. Always a really subtle conversationalist and interesting guy. He says, "I'm thinking a poll." And my mother says, "Oh?" And he says, "Well, would the average student nurse break the rules and go out with the average intern?" And my mother said, "Well, yes, I think think the average student nurse would go out with the average intern. But I'm above average. Upon which she perkily turned on her heel and sashayed off to her next duties, leaving my father to contemplate his next move and make some new plans for Friday night. Whether or not it was a long pursuit and how he eventually got her to relent is a story for another time. But I can only say that I'm really glad that she did relent so that I can be here and that I can tell you all about how it started. Thank you.
That's awesome. I literally have all of these stories and the imagery in my head, and I'm creating all of these movies. So thank you. That was really, really great. I would like to hear part 2. Our final storyteller of the evening is Deborah Apple. Deborah likes to walk, read cookbooks, cook, and visit her 2 grandsons in Israel every year, except for those 2 COVID years. And I hear that she is just returning from her latest visit. Awesome. So please welcome Deborah Apple.
When I was a kid, Valentine's Day was a really big deal in my school. And every year, we'd each get a shoebox and decorate it as beautifully or as plainly as we wanted. Put a slit in the top, and then we'd go around and we'd pass out our Valentines. But as beautiful as some of those boxes might have been, they could not compare to the exquisite, heart-shaped boxes of chocolate that I swooned over at a Nino's drugstore. My favorite was red with satin and velvet and lace and maybe a pearl here and there. But there were pink ones, there was a yellow one, and they were all luxurious. They were like the most beautiful materials that existed. They were like the crown jewels of boxes of candy, and I wanted one so bad. And I figured that someday I'd have a boyfriend who would get it for me for Valentine's Day. So I get to high school, and I had a boyfriend, but only for 6 months and not during Valentine's Day. So high school, I got nothing. College, nothing. Well, 5 years later, I met a guy, the guy I was destined to marry. He had many fine qualities. He was smart. He was generous. He was kind. He was honest. But he also had a thing that was essential to my ideal man. Now, this ideal man thing was something my friends and I talked about. And it was like thinking of all the qualities we wanted, embodied usually by a celebrity or a movie star. So there was the Robert Redford model, Paul Newman. And my best friend went for George Segal. My ideal man, Groucho Marx. And you may wonder, why? Because he was funny. He made me laugh. And that was something I couldn't possibly live without. So this guy was funny. And in fact, we shared a pretty weird sense of humor. And I'll give you an example. So early on in our relationship, I think it was like the 2nd or 3rd date, we went somewhere. We get back to where I lived, and he turns to me and goes, "Would you like me to help you out of the car?" And I thought, who does that anymore? And I said, sure. So he reaches over, he opens the door, and he shoved me out. Now, that might not be for everyone, but I said, this is the guy for me. And that sense of humor we share has served us well over the years, because if I get a laugh every day, even a little teeny laugh, I'm signing up for another year. And in a few weeks, it will have been 41 years. Wow. So, did this paragon, did this ideal man of mine give me that heart-shaped box of chocolates with the satin and velvet? No. And was it because he was just really a big jerk? And it wasn't. It was that we lived in Israel. We were both immigrants from the United States. We met, we married, and we lived in this country where they don't do Valentine's Day. So it wasn't part of our relationship at all. But, every year on February 14th, I'd say, you know, if someday we're in the United States on Valentine's Day, I would love for you to get me a heart-shaped box of chocolates with velvet and satin and bows and just beautiful stuff on it. I've dreamed of this since I was a child, okay? And he'd say, okay. Well, due to unexpected and unhappy circumstances, we did end up back in the United States a few years later. We got here in March, and at the end of January, I said, just a reminder, I really want the box of chocolate for Valentine's Day, heart-shaped, preferably red with satin and velvet, but just beautiful stuff on it, okay? And he said, okay. So here I'm entrusting this sacred mission to my husband to fulfill my childhood dream and this romantic fantasy. What could possibly go wrong? So on Valentine's Day, he comes home and he's carrying a bag, and it's like, okay, he didn't forget. And he pulls out a box of chocolates and he says, Happy Valentine's Day. And I look at it, and it's a plain, rectangular box of chocolates. And I looked at it, and I looked at him, and it's like we were frozen in time. And I could see from the expression on his face that the expression on my face was the kind of expression if I'd said, did these pants make me look fat? And he'd said, yes! So, when I could finally speak, I said, this isn't what I wanted. And he said, it's a box of chocolates. And I said, did I mention that I wanted heart-shaped with red velvet and stuff on it? And he said, this is C's. It's supposed to be really good candy. I said, I don't care about the candy. I've never cared about the candy. I just want that box. And he said, I get it. Well, and he did, because next year he came home with a bag, and this was that flimsy plastic kind of bag, and I could see clearly a heart-shaped box. And I thought, oh, my moment has arrived. So he takes it out, and he gives it to me. And I hold it in my hands, and I look at it, and I say, this is absolutely the tackiest, cheesiest, ugliest box of candy I've ever seen in my life. It was like faded pink. It had crappy plastic flowers, and it had a little sad bow. And I just looked at it, and it was hilarious. And I just started laughing. And as I laughed, it just like put an end to that dream of mine, this fantasy I'd had since childhood. And I realized I've been holding on to this dream, which was based on memories from when I was 8 and 10. I mean, really? And I thought, do dreams like that really come true for people in real life, or is it just in Hallmark movies? And I realized that if I were given the choice of living a Hallmark movie moment or having a really good laugh, I'm definitely going for the laugh. Thank you.
That was awesome. Thank you, Deborah. And thank you, all of our storytellers, for a wonderful evening once again of storytelling. It takes so much courage to share a piece of your lives, not a fake story, but a piece of your lives with us and with those that are online So thank you. We don't take that lightly. If you are in the audience or online and you would like to tell a story, we invite you to do so. I'm sure there's information in the comment section of the video, as well as here in the museum as well. There are flyers and information. And so if you're interested, please do so. We're always taking new storytellers. So I hope what I said at the beginning is true at the end, that if you came in feeling like a stranger, that you'll leave feeling like you're in a room of community where you've dug a little deeper into some wonderful people's lives.
I just got an email through 7 Stories. We've got our first sign up from going to downtown to see Fame. What is it, Deborah? Fameless.
I already can't remember.
Well, it's a storytelling downtown that a local Burien runs, but it's Locally Fameless, it's called. So we went to that, and then from that, a storyteller contacted through 7 Stories. They're signed up for next month, and I just wanted to remind people that the next month the theme is acceptance. But then she suggested, since we had 2 theme possibilities this time, how about, and it is Father's Day in June, so how about we can say Dad could be another option. So pick one of these up on your way out and spread the word about this very relaxing, supportive night of storytelling. Thanks.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you for coming to 7 Stories. Thank you to our sponsors, and a special thanks to Scott from the B-Town blog. We really appreciate all of your support, as well as the Highline Heritage Museum for hosting us today. Have a great night, everyone.